Hello everyone, I'm the magician Ashley, and this is my assistant Jeff.
Hello.
Today, I'm going to use my psychic powers to show you a magic trick. Let's go see how it's done. Now we will need a volunteer from the audience to come forward and place a 5x5 grid of cards on the board. Now this audience member can place them randomly face up or face down, however they choose. I will blindfold myself to ensure that I do not see how this process occurs.
So the audience member has now placed the 5x5 grid.
Wonderful. But you know what, Jeff? I'm feeling very psychic today. Why don't you go ahead and add another row and column to this grid?
You sure about that?
Well, it'll be tough, but I think I can handle it.
Alright. So, it's now a 6x6 grid.
Wonderful. So now, will our volunteer please come forward again? And please flip one of the cards over. And using just my psychic powers, I will be able to tell which card has been flipped over.
So, the card has been flipped.
Wonderful. Now I will remove my blindfold and use my psychic powers to determine which card has been flipped. I feel like it's located somewhere over here. Is it this card? Yes. So how did this trick work? Do I really have psychic powers? Well, I'll tell you. So remember we started out with a 5x5 grid of cards. And those were actually placed randomly by our volunteer member from the audience. Now, when I asked my assistant to make the trick harder by placing an extra row and column, well, he was actually making the trick possible. Let's explain how this worked. Now, this was the card that was flipped over, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it back. Now let's take a look at our original 5x5 grid. In the first row, I had 1, 2, 3 face-down cards. But I wanted to make the number of cards even, so my assistant added an extra face-down card. Now let's look at the second row. There were 1, 2 face-down cards, an even number. So he added a face-up card to keep that number even. He did this to all the rows. 2, 4, 4. So all the rows had an even number of cards. Now when he added this bottom row, he actually made the number of face-down cards in all of the columns even as well. Now all rows and columns have an even number of face-down cards. So when our volunteer decided to flip this card, I noticed that this row now had an odd number of face-down cards, and that this column also had an odd number of face-down cards. Therefore, at the intersection, I knew that was the card that had been flipped over. So now that you know how the trick works, I'm going to go through it again so you can follow along this time. Now I will set up the 5x5 grid of cards. Alright, now I will go ahead and add the extra row and column. So let's take a look at the first row. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 face-down cards. Since that's already an even number, I'm going to add a face-up card. Let's look at the second row. There are 1, 2 face-down cards, also an even number. Now let's look at the columns. This column has 2 face-down cards, so I will add a face-up card. Now all rows and all columns have an even number of face-down cards. So if I were to randomly select a card, say this card, I would now see that this row has 1, 2, 3 face-down cards, and that this column has 1, 2, 3 face-down cards. Therefore, I can tell that this is the card that has been turned over. So how does this trick relate to computer science? Well, computers represent information using ones and zeros. You can think of this kind of like face-up or face-down cards. Now, computers send information in this form all the time. So how can we always assure that the information is correct? Well, let's say that before a message is sent, two computers agree that the message will contain an even number of zeros. If one computer receives the message and sees that there are an odd number of zeros, it will know that the message is incorrect.